Occam's garbage bag. Most professional scientists, from my experience over the years and even when I was at school, are like Hoover salesmen. They neither make the Hoover nor use them. They simply sell them. They normally just go on about the books that they read when they were at school or university and just pass on that same information that they memorized to other people who are supposed to memorize them and regurgitate them for exams without really truly understanding them. They bleat on about the principle of minimum rational explanation makes for maximum probability of being the truth, which is Occam's razor. If you look it up, it just means that the minimum explanation that is rational for a given problem is probably the highest probability of being the truth. Yet, having said that, they seem to love Occam's garbage bag, where they cannot get enough of these particles without any rational attention to reality or the observations with their senses, just constantly worrying about or accepting whatever mathematical equations, which by the way are deeply flawed. I've already said this and I'll say them again in other videos. You'll see that cumulative there seems to be a lot wrong with this human mathematics because they're full of assumptions that are not real. So prove it. All the subsequent problems in physics, I believe, come from this pointless obsession with particles. Why? This obsession with particles fundamentally involves magic and mystery. It does not involve things that are obvious, because obvious doesn't really have a value. You can sell magic and mystery endlessly, but obvious is free. And the holy men, which are Nietzsche's true supermen, that's a separate thing which we will discuss later, in evolution and ethics, are the people who, by the way, seem to do almost nothing but get all of the privileges. They're the highest echelons of any society around the world, and all they offer is an expertise in magic and mystery, and they seem to be doing very, very well. There is, of course, a Darwinian survival advantage, which again is not beyond the scope of this, why the human brain accepts magic and mystery endlessly, is because it suits our survival. It gives us an advantage, which actually sounds like a contradiction, because why would rationality be less advantageous than magic and mystery? But that's a separate issue. And the reason I said that is because even people who were at the beginning seem like perfectly rational, natural philosophers end up afterwards being hijacked by these holy men, and it turns into a religion, a cult. If you read, Buddha, I'm not a big expert, but from the little that I know about him, he seems like a very rational, natural philosopher. His arguments are perfectly reasonable and natural, and yet when you see, he never declares himself as being something religious or something extraterrestrial, but afterwards the holy men hijacked him and turned him into basically almost nothing now about Buddhism is rational, and it's almost entirely ceremonial, and it's almost entirely full of magic and mystery. The thing that you can sit under a tree and automatically be enlightened, just like that, like a bolt of lightning coming from the sky. If that was the case, why would we send our children to universities? Why not make them sit under a tree and they'll all be car mechanics, or they'll all be computer geniuses? So you wouldn't need experience, you wouldn't need tuition, etc. But anyway, my point is that the holy men can endlessly sell this, and I believe quantum physics has become a cult. It is not really science anymore. And the reason why that is again because I said these are special people. If they can interpret something that is magical and mysterious and the rest of us can't, we will have to pay them for it. And this particle business, nothing adds to magic and mystery in physics like these endless particles that keep coming out of the quantum bowl, and we keep throwing Nobel Prizes at it like candy in a kid's store. To recap, I've said this before, let's go back. The universe seems like a very, very, very simple place. It begins with a hydrogen atom, a proton, and an electron, and basically it just gets to be a bigger hydrogen atom. If you look at it, protons, neutrons are modified protons, but they're not even modified because they're protons in the nucleus, covalently bonded with the electron from the orbital that's been squashed in by gravity. So endlessly, we just get a bigger and bigger and bigger proton and nothing else. So it seems to be a very simple place. So why do we need gravitons? Now look at this first irrational mathematical nonsense that comes in. If we think about, just take the hydrogen atom, there's the proton, there's an electron. That relationship they explain first of all with charge theory. This apparently is positively charged, this is negatively charged, and the two are perfectly balanced. By the way, totally harmonious crap. If that is the case, you wouldn't have a hydrogen atom, the two of them being a more stable environment. So they can't be perfectly balanced, these charges. There must be a leftover hunger that the proton has for the electron, otherwise there wouldn't be further congregation and there wouldn't be gravitational condensation. If you look at the evolution of the gravity path that I've already explained, which you hopefully found reasonable. But in any case, the most logical thing in this particular case, especially when you think about how electrons have excited states, they move away and closer to the proton depending on their energy content, the ground state and the excited states, then the most rational explanation seems to be that the proton is nothing but a force field, a quantized diminishing force field as it goes out. And the idea that there's a solid there is crazy, and more crazy even, the idea that there are quarks in there, these three different kinds of quarks that are completely entities that have been derived at mathematically, and there is absolutely no, well, you couldn't observe them anyway, because if you bear with me, you'll see that a lot of the problem with this positive charge business has absolutely nothing to do with the proton. So the implication is we know almost nothing about the proton. All we know about is the behavior of the electron under different circumstances, and the positive charge repulsion nonsense is basically the electrons behaving in a repulsive way when the direction of motion is reversed. So the quark discovery is a further obsession with ghosts and then finding them because we want to find them. We don't strive to make things easy. We don't strive to make things simple. We want them to be complicated, because otherwise, where's the Nobel Prize in the obvious? And there's another one, for example, the string theory. If you look at it, these are mathematics, by the way, that apparently you have to keep adding numbers until you get the right answer. And believe it or not, they then accept that that right answer must be the right answer, because of course mathematics is infallible. It is the perfect engine of truth, and that number happens to be 10 in this particular case, I believe. I don't know much about it, but anyway, it's another mathematical nonsense that we must have hidden dimensions. Now, if you look at this, and then when they explain this hidden dimension business, now look at it. First of all, the three-dimensionality, the X, Y, Z axis, is a human invention, because it only serves our minds that we must know what is in front of us, above and behind us. Whether the three dimensions actually means anything per se, objectively for the universe, is a separate matter that we really can't talk about. But in any case, even if you accept that the three dimensions exist, now look at the insanity of the explanation for the extra dimension. What they're saying is that if you look at this dimension here, that line, as it appears a line, when you get close to it, you find that actually it's not a line. It's a pipe. It's a three-dimensional pipe, and you can see the ant crawling over it. Now, what does that really tell you? It should tell you that you made a mistake in the first place. What you thought, if you stand back far enough and you look at an oil pipeline in the desert, it may look to you like a straight line, but that doesn't make it a straight line per se, because that was you who made the mistake of assuming that it was a straight line. So you are still looking at three dimensions, but you were just mistaken. So what is a hadron collider? This is the thing that keeps popping up new particles all over the place. In reality, I think if you follow the logic of the videos here, and if you see what I see, you may not. You may at the end of the day think, yes, they're right, and that's fine too. But if you look at this thing, it seems to be the biggest, most expensive, pointless toy in science, because they're trying to do things without actually having understood the basics to begin with. If you don't understand what an electron is, and you don't know that electrons and photons are the same, if you don't know what a proton is or a neutron is, really, and you don't understand what the positive charges are, then I'm afraid you're wasting your time going this high up in trying to find other particles. So let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean that they've discovered with this Hadron Collider, or what they're trying to do, and you can make up your own mind. A proton is a force field, and it traps electrons. I've already said this, they're not mutually attractive, because that's not what you would get, and you'll see even more further evidence as we go along. The force field is stationary and cannot move. By definition, If in the universe a thing provides stationary points, then that thing cannot be the same as the thing that is perpetual motion, because it and the opposite of it can never be the same. And this is a problem that great people leave behind. Both Einstein and Newton were amazingly great people, but they have left a lot of problems behind that other people do not dare to question, and unfortunately they're wrong. So you need photons to first bind to it. In other words, before you can mess about with a proton, you have to have an electron somehow bind to it, and then that acts as a point of further acceleration, or where energy can be put in so that the thing can move. Now look for yourself. A major flaw in physics must be addressed first, and this is my point as I go on and on and on about mathematics. Too much mathematics, not enough looking. There is a simple problem, and it is my understanding that no physicist in the world can explain this visually for you so that it may make sense. All they will do is come up with mathematical nonsense. This is a hydrogen atom. Just look at it. There's a proton, there's an electron. If you were to apply a force to it or energy to it, we assume that it's stationary. How do you make this hydrogen atom move? What happens to it? Can you give me a visual example of how this thing moves? I believe there's no physicist in this world that can explain that simple problem. And if you cannot explain this in a visual form instead of resorting to mathematics, then you have a problem. But I believe the answer is simple. You can do this experiment yourself at home, and you have seen it many, many times. Now watch this. Here you have perfectly round globules of water sitting there on a flat surface. They're not moving anywhere. They're not being accelerated. You have to imagine that it's a perfectly flat surface here. Now if you accelerate them somehow, either by blowing some air on them, or you just tilt that surface that they were sitting on, this is what happens. So they bend in the direction of motion. Now the reason why things act like fluids is because of the wave motion that it contains. So in other words, the behavior at macro level is identical to the behavior at the atomic level, which is what you should expect it to be. Bricks and mortar again. So this is what happens. You twist the orbitals. In other words, if we go back to this, that orbital, that electron, first you have to bind to this electron, and this electronic field, which is now round, has to be twisted, has to be deformed in the direction of flow before it can go. And there is a problem here, because first, the resistance to acceleration, which is the amazing insight that Isaac Newton had to define acceleration, which, by the way, the quantum physicists have totally missed, is that there is a force. Now that force is because of this interaction here. The proton is hungry for the electron and is holding it very tightly in this orbit. For you to deform that, you would first have to put enough energy to deform this orbital, and the resistance that you would expect, that you would receive, is because you have to stretch this force now. So I apologize for the quality of this thing. I drew it years ago, and I haven't done anything since, but I think you probably can see it. Here's the hydrogen atom, here's the proton, and there I've just put in, say, 4 units of motion wave that you would inject into the system so that you can move it. You first get resistance as it absorbs it, but it won't deform. You may, it's not meant to be quantifiable, but it's just to give you an example. You put in a second one also, so 2 of them have gone into this electronic cloud, and still there's nothing going on, i.e. still resistance to acceleration. And as you put a third one, the orbital then deforms in the direction of the flow. And as you put more and more into it, this is what happens. This has to be the thing that happens, because you can see it. You can do this experiment at home with droplets of water, and you will see that you would have to deform those orbitals, those electronic orbitals, in the direction of flow. What else could it be? If you don't like this explanation, which you may not, I mean, I'm not saying that this is absolutely right. It is right for me. I can't think of anything else, because it definitely hasn't got anything to the proton. The proton, you can see like a grain of sand in a droplet of water, and is being dragged by it because it's in a suspension inside this cloud of energy that we call the electronic cloud. So then it will be dragged by it as it goes along. In the Hadron Collider, they keep adding photons to the hydrogen atom, because remember, the proton cannot be isolated. It's like having a grain of sand in a bucket of water and thinking that the thing is dry. It's impossible, because you have so much of the very thing that it needs, that it hungers for, all around it, that to believe that you're actually doing anything to the proton itself is madness, because it's surrounded by it. So because a proton must first become a hydrogen atom, i.e. Bind to a photon or an electron, because they're both the same thing, before you can accelerate it, then I've just shown you what I believe happens when you add more photons to move this thing, or energy to move it. After acceleration, they basically first fill this up with an enormous amount of water, or wetness, or energy, if you like, and then what they do is they smash it against the nuclei of I don't know, lead or whatever the hell it is, like a brick wall. What do you think is really happening? If you take a very wet stone and you smash that stone against a brick wall, what would you expect to get? You would expect to get a particle zoo of droplets of water, surely. And the example I have here, there are two problems with this problem, with the Hadron Collider thing. First, if you take a vase, say two colors, red and white, for the sake of argument, to explain, like proton, electron, and then you accelerate it or smash it very, very hard against a brick wall, all you're going to get are fragments of the vase, like bits and pieces of the vase all over the place. The great majority of them are going to be totally unstable, and they will recombine, because they always do. It's like droplets of water. If you leave them on a surface, they will recombine. But more important than that, and this is a very, very serious thing that seems to have been missed, and you'll see it, a very clear example of it when we get to the two-hole experiment, is that whatever equipment that you use, that you think you are detecting what is going on in there, is seriously corrupting the experiment. The equipment, which is bound to be electrical and magnetic fields and all that kind of stuff, very basic stuff, are very, very corrosive to the particles that you're generating. They are corrupting it. So there is no way that you could be getting any information about them that is objective, that is to do with the actual particle. It is already corrupted, because you've corrupted it to begin with. The two-hole experiment nonsense is a very good example, and I think it's in the next video. You will see that the detector itself compels the outcome. It should be obvious. I have no idea how anyone can accept it, that when we look at it, the thing changes its behavior. It's a bit like saying, if you kick a dog and it moves, it doesn't make it Mystic Meg. It is not clairvoyant. You just did it. And to believe that the particles at subatomic levels have somehow an understanding of what's going on is complete madness. That just makes any religious nonsense that has ever existed far more palatable than this is not science. This is complete madness. So one of the things that they're trying to do, by the way, that was the first bit, is to create something like a black hole on Earth, or a particle that makes a black hole. Again, a mathematical garbage that has come about. But look at the insanity of the principle of what that really means. To begin with, what is a black hole? It doesn't exist, does it? Because if you think about it, I have no idea why a perfectly three-dimensional lump of mass with extreme lattice pressure has been called a hole. So in other words, you have to, if you actually think about how a black hole forms, is it starts with a nebula, it condenses when its mass is great enough to become a big star, and that star, if the mass is big enough, can go kind of hyper condensation, and then collapse on itself and go through the neutron star and finally turn into a black star. But it's still a three-dimensional thing. It's still a lump there. This lump is super, super hungry for electrons, because guess what? Throughout its evolution, it has done nothing but lose motion waves, photons, because that's what the thing is. If you look at the gravity video earlier on, hopefully you'll agree with me that the only way gravity increases when there's no more mass to be added is because of the proportionality. We keep losing what is the accelerant, and if you take what is the accelerant, you are left with a thing that is dry, basically. So the mass must increase if it is the ratio of the two, and that is the only thing that makes sense. So the black star is nothing but a big lump that is just sitting there. So and it's sorry, still very hungry, etc., etc. You know the story. It will even light can't escape its gravity when it's in a certain distance, and so on. That makes perfectly sense. But it's not a hole. It is not a wormhole. It's going nowhere. And all this idiotic concepts of let's go through it to another universe, because once again we love that. I mean, this makes the Lord of the Rings look positively, more palatable. And also, all you have to do is one mystical person suggesting something crazy, and it just snowballs it, because everybody else then pretends they understand it, and they extrapolate from it and become even more crazy. The idea that you can go into a black hole and come up somewhere else is as mad as if I said to you, here's a rocket ship, please sit in it and go and drive into the sun, and that is a gateway to somewhere else. What would you say to me? You would accuse me of being a madman. But compared to the sun, a black star is a rabid tiger. The sun is just a fluffy bunny rabbit compared to this thing. When you think about it, its gravitational power, its gravitational field. So for you to even imagine the nonsense about going in a rocket ship through this thing, it means you don't understand any physics at all. You certainly don't understand what gravity is. Now, let's create a mini black star on Earth. Now, look at what that actually means. First of all, inside the black star, the proton congregation within it has become so tightly wound that it's super hungry. So it's barely got enough motion waves or electrons. Remember how neutrons were formed, and they're covalently bonded in the nucleus. So that's even more tighter, infinitely tighter. Who knows? I don't know how to, but you can see the principle of how hungry it is. If you can just now imagine, but instead of hungry, let's say how dry it is, because it's lost all of its accelerant and it becomes drier and drier and drier. To create that same dry particle on Earth, what is it? What do you have to do? What would you have to do? This is what you would have to do, in my opinion. You would have to go into the Mariana Trench in the middle of the ocean, go all the way to the bottom of it. Now imagine the pressure and imagine the amount of water that surrounds you. Pick up a grain of sand in your hand and try to blow dry it. That is what you would have to do. That is how insane it is to try and create something of that hunger in a place where it is completely inundated with the accelerant, because you're accelerating it anyway. Do you know what that really means? So a proton can never be isolated and exist on its own. Not on Earth anyway. I don't know what situation you would have to create, because whatever you do, it is surrounded by accelerants, by electrons, by photons, and by all the other molecules, which, by the way, contain a lot of electrons. So before you do anything else, it will steal the electrons off the other one, or it will bind to them. So it will always exist as a form of hydrogen atom under normal conditions on Earth. It must do, because it's just surrounded around it. It's in the middle of the ocean. It exists as a supersaturated hydrogen atom when inside a collider. What is a collider? The best way to actually imagine or to view it is like a grain of sand inside a running hose pipe. So the whole of this thing that goes for hundreds of miles, I don't know, kilometers, this pipe is nothing but a hose pipe, which with the magnets or electromagnets around it constantly tries to accelerate this thing, which means that it's full of the very thing that they're trying to get rid of. If you're trying to create a very dry particle by submerging it in a hose pipe, you're completely out of your mind. It exists as a neutron under extreme lattice pressure infusion. So I'm just showing you the different stages that a hydrogen atom can exist. So a neutron itself is nothing but a hydrogen atom with a very tightly held. And please remember this, because it will come very useful later as a proof of the nonsense about, further nonsense about the charges, that the proton and the electron are mutually attractive, etc., and the reason why they don't fall. And it exists as a black neutron in a black star. I've just made that up. I don't know what the hell you would call it, but in any case, that neutron is not the same as where the fusion is, because it still has a lot more fluid or accelerant around it. But in a black star, it's super hungry, so it's got to be something totally different. And but it still must have some photonic glue to bind the protons tightly together, because remember, in the center of any atom, you have protons and neutrons that have to be covalently bonded. So why should the black star be any different? That we will have exactly the same thing. It's worth reiterating, but I want to go back to this nonsense about the positive charges is completely irrational, because we have never isolated protons, therefore we don't know what protons would do to each other. The logic tells us that they're additive because they cannot be repulsive, otherwise there would be no nuclei, and it wouldn't grow as the numbers increase for gravity to increase, if you accept the video about gravity. So anyway, the magnetic field experiments and the electroscope observations are all due to motion wave. They're nothing to do with the positivity of the electron. Let's look at it again. It is to do with the direction of where the waves are. So if you look here, there's the south, when south again means nothing, so let's assume that that's the positive or the motion poor end. There's another motion poor end. If you were to draw the vector forces, where would they be? The vector forces of that side, as it comes from the motion rich, goes round and goes back in there, is that way. The motion, the vector force for this one would be that way. So as you can see, that goes that way, that goes that way. They repel one another. That's why they repel one another, because they're not going in the same direction. This positive nonsense has nothing to do with the proton. It is still to do with the electromagnetic cloud. And of course we know the negative end, because look, the direction of the motion is opposing each other, so they repel one another. And as I showed you before, the same principle applies. This has nothing to do with protons. So the idea that protons are positively charged and they repel one another, etc., etc., is nonsense. And again, if to recap, you've probably already seen this, the electroscope. If you look at it, plastic rod is negatively charged. As you push in, there are the vector forces of the electronic cloud as it goes in, and these are, in these two blades, they become saturated and they push against one another. Look at the vector forces as it's going down, and they separate, and that gives you the repulsion there, because the motion waves are opposing. Now what happens when you put the glass rod, which is positively charged, and it sucks the motion waves out? Exactly the same. It is again to do with the saturation here of the motion waves. It is nothing to do with proton. It is once again the same as the magnetic field. So anyway, if you need a complete systematic explanation of the point raised here and in the other videos, please get this book. It's free of charge as an ebook. I don't want anything from you, but it may help you understand these videos a bit better, because I apologize that they're a bit all over the place. I'm trying to create a little bit of interest in every one of them and a little bit of seed of doubt in your mind. Not necessarily that you then think that I have the right answer, but you may be the one that finds the right answer once you've understood that these problems are, because the physics has become so intimidating that no one seems to want to question anything. Everybody's afraid of their position, of their jobs, of their reputation, and truth be damned. Anyway, thanks.